Hi friends, I'm Chelsea and I'm here to talk about the books I read in August. So August started out as a pretty slow reading month, partially because I was reading a book that is over 1,000 pages. If you know, you know. But it picked up a good amount by the end and it ended up being a really good reading month. Most of my books were 4 to 5 stars. Did a couple rereads, which was fun for me. I also listened to every book on audio. I did a lot of immersion reading physically, listening to the audiobook, just kind of going back and forth. And I read a pretty wide range of genres. So I'm just gonna jump in and talk to you about these books, and I'm gonna go with the same method that I went with last month. I did like my pros and cons, and I'll be referring to my reading journal, so I'm gonna try to keep it fairly concise and quick since we have 8 books here. I'm gonna talk about my pros and cons, quick little synopsis, and then move right along. So the first book I read in August was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and this was a reread. I read it initially back in high school, and of course I've seen the movie Keira Knightley. I'm very familiar with the story. It's one of my favorites. I love it. I wanted to read it for Jane Austen July. It ended up being end of July, early August, so didn't really count for July, but I still read it. So I listened to the audiobook. It was the Libby Duke Classics edition, and it was really entertaining and really funny, so I would recommend listening to that if you want to listen to Pride and Prejudice. I probably don't need to tell you what Pride and Prejudice is about, but if you don't know, really it's pretty much just people looking to get married, parents looking for a match for their daughters because, you know, they got to secure that family fortune and legacy and all that. So Elizabeth Bennet is our main character. She doesn't really care about societal expectations, but her parents are trying to get her matched up with someone. There's just a lot of drama, a lot of gossip, a lot of dancing, a lot of socializing. It's people just going to other people's houses is one way I've heard this book being described, and it's pretty accurate, but it's entertaining. Not a lot of plot, but it's quite good. And so along the way, Elizabeth meets Mr. Darcy, who is quite standoffish, quite rude, prideful. No one really likes him, but Elizabeth and Darcy kind of have this like rapport, you know, some chemistry, some sparks are flying. I feel like this is the original enemies to lovers romance situation, and it's pretty fun. My pros for this one: I love Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, both just their personalities individually, but also them together. I love their dynamic and how stubborn they both are, how like fiery and passionate they both are. Their interactions are just really entertaining and fun to watch, and I was just rooting for them. I mean, I know that they get together in the end. That's not a spoiler because it's like a classic romance. I just really love those two a lot. I love how Elizabeth just does not fit into the typical type of woman back in the 1800s or whatever time period. She just feels very independent. She does what she wants. She does not care. And I also really loved the character development of both Elizabeth and Darcy. Like, they say and do things throughout the course of the book that really change the others' perceptions and opinions of each other and also just of themselves. Like I said, it's very funny and quite satirical. Doing this as a reread was very comforting for me. Knowing the story already, it was just really fun to listen and like know what's happening. Sometimes I could like zone out a little bit, which I try not to, but with a reread like this, you don't really have to pay attention as much because you already know what's going to happen, and it's just a comforting thing. So the cons, really, it's just like kind of what I said. I zoned out a little bit at times, partially because of just like the old language, flowery writing. We don't talk like that anymore, and a lot of the books I read are not in that style, so it just took a little more mental energy, and it felt a little long at times. It felt longer than I remembered it being for some reason. It's not much plot, like I said, but really fun. I loved it again the second time, and definitely recommend reading this one if you have not already. So I'm also going to do a quick quote at the end of each of these. Here is a quick quote from Mr. Darcy towards Elizabeth. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. Love, Mr. Darcy. Next up, I read Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. So this was also a reread. It's kind of funny. The first 2 books I read in August were rereads. This was for one of my in-person book clubs. So this is a literary fiction, and it features 3 main characters for the most part. So Tova is one of the main characters. She is an older woman who lives in the Pacific Northwest, and she works the night shift at an aquarium. Her husband passed away, and so she's just looking for a way to pass the time, and she kind of bonds with some of the animals. Specifically, there is an octopus there named Marcellus. They strike up this kind of like unlikely connection. Marcellus gets his own perspective, his own chapters, and he's very condescending and judgmental of humans, but he has this special attachment towards Tova as well. And also with Tova, she is dealing with the loss of her husband, like I mentioned, but also her son who disappeared a long time ago, and she never found out what happened. So there's kind of like a little mystery. It all comes together in a really beautiful way. So I absolutely loved this. I think I liked it more on the reread actually, and this is a book that I could see myself just kind of coming back to and reading again. It's just a very comforting, cozy kind of book, and I love it. So here's my pros. Like I said, very cozy. It's very wholesome, very heartwarming, short chapters, easy read. I read it in like 2 days, I think. The audiobook is amazing. One of my top audiobook recommendations. If you have not seen my audiobook recommendations video, this is like one of the top ones on there. And yeah, Marcellus is one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. I just love him, and I do love Tova too, and I just love their relationship. I was just very attached to the characters and the story. Like I said, this is heartwarming and wholesome, but it also has a little bit of melancholy feel. It deals with topics of like grief and loss and death as well, but not in a like depressing or dark way, just kind of dealing with it as a part of life, but also being hopeful at the same time. I loved how the mystery came together at the end. I don't really have a lot of cons, really, just that like sometimes it was a little slow. It's not the most inventive or intricate plot. It's a little predictable. I don't mind, but that could be a con for some people potentially. And then Cameron is honestly an insufferable man-child at times. Some people really hate him. I did grow to love him, but he is very frustrating at the beginning of the book and throughout the book. I just really love this book. Highly recommend it. I am so glad I reread it for my book club. So here's a quote from Marcellus the octopus. Humans, for the most part, you are dull and blundering, but occasionally you can be remarkably bright creatures. So next up, I read The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This was for Ellen Made Book Club. This is a Greek mythology retelling of Achilles, who is known as one of the greatest warriors. I will say I don't know much about Greek mythology, and even after reading this book, I definitely don't consider myself an expert, so I might get some stuff wrong. This is just going off of what I read in this book. This one is about Achilles and Patroclus's relationship. And so Achilles comes from a pretty prestigious family, and he is just known as like the best of the Greeks. He's very strong, very talented, and very beautiful. And then Patroclus shows up. He is an exiled young prince. He's basically a nobody, but they meet and they form a connection, become friends, and then there is a romance that forms between the two of them. The first half of the book really is focusing on their relationship that's developing, and then they also go off to learn skills of like medicine and fighting, and they just really form like a really close bond during this time. And then the second half of the book is more action, more battle. So they hear that Helen of Sparta has been kidnapped by the Trojans, I believe. And so pretty much all the big names in Greek mythology, they go to Troy to fight and try to win her back. Then it just becomes Achilles going off to war and Patroclus wanting to follow him. Even though he's not a warrior himself, he goes in support of Achilles, and because he wants to make sure that he's safe. I really loved this one. I will say I read Circe by this author, and I thought it was just okay, which I know is not a super popular opinion. I was just kind of bored and not super connected to it, so I was a little skeptical coming into this one, but I really loved it. It's one that's stuck with me. So my pros, I really loved Patroclus. It's told from his perspective, which I was not expecting, but I really loved his perspective. It felt very unique to me. He's just kind of this gentle, quiet, somewhat awkward person who doesn't really want glory or fame or power. I just really appreciated his perspective and connected with him a lot. Just the vibes of this book were great. It felt very cozy at the beginning, very enchanting, just like atmospheric. It just really drew me in, and I really enjoyed listening to the audiobook. I feel like that enhanced the experience a lot for me. This book definitely made me think. It impacted me a lot, and I got quite emotional at the end. I was very attached to their romance, but also just the story in general. I thought the writing was beautiful, and I did enjoy learning about like the Trojan War and just a lot of the different Greek gods and characters. Just also reflecting on the themes of kind of the dangers of power and pride and revenge, what it does to you when you're seeking those things. That was very apparent to me by the end of the book. So some of the cons, I liked the first half a lot better, where they were just kind of getting to know each other. Once the battle and war stuff happened, it kind of lost my interest a little bit, but then by the end I was more into it. So it kind of ebbed and flowed. For me, the dialogue was not super interesting or engaging. The writing, like descriptive writing, was really good, but the dialogue was kind of boring sometimes. And then Achilles was not a very likable character to me, which I guess is intentional, especially by the end of the book. That's part of like just what makes you reflect on your decisions and choices in life. Definitely he's not a favorite character of mine. Like I said, Patroclus was my favorite. Just a couple little things, but overall I really enjoyed this a lot. Here is a quote, and this is by Patroclus talking about Achilles. Who was he if not miraculous and radiant? Who was he if not destined for fame? All right, next up, I read this bad boy, Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. Just show you that. It's 1,200 pages and a 55-hour audiobook. I did it. I'm always scared, and I'm always relieved and satisfied and accomplished when I finish a book in the Stormlight Archive. This is the third book in the series. I've been just going through them, trying to get ready for the release of the fifth book in December. This was another wild ride. I don't even know where to begin. Like, this is epic fantasy following three main characters in this world that has these crazy storms and magic that is pretty much powered by the storms, but also a lot of religious and political tension, a lot of threats to just the world as a whole. There's some villains showing up, some forces that are definitely concerning. Not going to spoil anything because it's the third book in a series. And of course we get more backstory into Dalinar. He's one of the main characters. This book focuses on him a lot, but we also get a lot more insight on a lot of the other characters because there's so many, and we got a lot of POVs from a lot of different characters in this book, which I don't always enjoy, but I actually really enjoyed in this book. So my pros. There were two epic and amazing action-packed like battle scenes. Normally we get like one per book, but this one had two, and I was on the edge of my seat, did not want to put it down. So those were quite intense. I loved the character development and growth. I feel like I say this every time, but Sanderson, I feel like, is just so good at creating complex and layered characters and making you really feel for them and just kind of showing their journey throughout the span of time. This one definitely felt like a pivotal shift in like the plot and overall story of the series, and just like in their world, some things that are happening. Definitely feels like a turning point. There's also like a little murder mystery element, which I like. The politics and religion are always intriguing to me. Some big reveals. There was a lot going on in this one. So some cons for me, I will say this is probably my least favorite so far. It's still a 5-star, but I would say it's Words of Radiance, Way of Kings, and Oathbringer is my rating so far. So this one, there were some slower moments, especially with Dalinar's like backstory. Some of the interludes, a lot of those moments went on pretty long for me, and it just lost my interest a little bit. This one also has less Kaladin. It focuses more on Dalinar and Shallan, and Kaladin's pretty much my favorite character in the whole series, so that was a little sad, but again, I still enjoyed getting to see all the other characters. It's not my top new favorite book in the series, but still really good, really entertaining, epic, and I can't wait to keep reading. So here's a quote. Journey before destination. Some may call it a simple platitude, but it is far more. A journey will have pain and failure, stumbles, trials. But if we stop, if we accept the person we are when we fall, the journey ends. I have found, through painful experience, that the most important step a person can take is always the next one. Water break. Okay, next up I read Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes. This was for another one of my in-person book clubs, and this is another mythological retelling. So 2 of those in 1 month, which is not common for me, but actually I'm really glad I did that because there were some characters that overlap, just like general mentions of certain things that I was like, oh, I already kind of know about that. This one is narrated by the author, which I really enjoyed. She did a really good job. It was very funny and entertaining. So this one is, if you can tell by the cover, about Medusa and her story, which again, I didn't know really anything about. I heard the name and I thought maybe snakes were involved. That was pretty much it. From what I know from this book, at least, the myth of Medusa basically is that she is a mortal, but she's a gorgon, which is like this creature with wings and like big scary teeth, and usually they're immortal, but she is born as a mortal. So she grows up on this kind of isolated island with her sisters, but one day she is assaulted by Poseidon in Athene's temple. Athene takes revenge on her for the assault, which doesn't make sense to me. She curses her basically to replace her hair with snakes and to make it so that anyone she looks at will turn to stone immediately. So at the same time, this bumbling fool named Perseus is sent to get a gorgon head, and so their stories kind of intertwine. Definitely a reframing of that original myth. So Medusa is seen as this scary monster, but this one definitely kind of flips that on its head, says that like she's just a normal human with emotions and she's not a monster. She has all these bad things happen to her by people who are stronger than her. And then Perseus is always portrayed as like this hero who fetches the head of a monster, but in this book he has no idea what he's doing. It's just a very feminist twist, which I really appreciated. That was a pro. But the other pros, it's very funny and entertaining. I was not expecting that. There's a lot of drama between the gods. It's not dry at all. It's very easy to understand. It's also just kind of a short, easy book to read. There were also some really unique POVs. We have like a crow, a stone, snakes, olive grove. We also have a lot of different Greek gods like Athene, Zeus. I never can think of Greek gods. So there's a whole lot of POVs in this one, and I'll get to that. I also just thought the writing was really beautiful and engaging, just really funny, smart dialogue. I definitely want to read more of her books. So the cons for this one, and I've heard a couple people mention this, and I would have to agree that this doesn't really focus so much on the story of Medusa as you would think, like the way it's advertised. Medusa is a part of the story and it ultimately comes back around, but we get so many different characters and little tiny stories within that it doesn't always feel focused on Medusa. And so maybe it's just like faulty advertising. It kind of meandered a little bit, and there were times where I was like, why does this person matter? Like, how do they connect to the story? It did connect in the end. There were just so many different POVs. It just didn't feel as zoomed in on Medusa as you would expect. And it was a little hard to connect with everyone because there were so many different POVs and different characters. And I feel like the main focus was on some pretty unlikable characters like Athene and Perseus. I wanted more of Medusa kind of getting inside her head and her relationship with her sisters, because I really liked when that happened, but I wanted more of that. Really well written though, and a really good story. So I would definitely recommend it. And here's a quote. "Who decides what is a monster? I don't know," said Medusa. "Men, I suppose. So to mortal men, we are monsters. Because of our teeth, our flight, our strength. They fear us, so they call us monsters. Men call us monsters because they don't understand us." Next up, I read Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. This was actually from my TBR jar, and this was a 5-star prediction. That did not happen, which is sad. I need to probably stop doing 5-star predictions because usually it fails every time. So this might be the last time I do that prompt. This is a contemporary romance, and it's a second chance romance, and it is about Macy, who is a pediatrics resident. She's engaged to a financially secure man. She's just kind of going about her life, trying to make it through, but she suddenly runs into Elliot, who was her childhood best friend and first love, but they haven't talked in like 11 years. Something clearly happened there. So we get the present day with that scenario, and then we also get the past where they meet as teenagers. Her father buys this vacation home. They love to read in the closet and bond over books. They just really become friends and get to know each other, and so we get the past timeline with them being teenagers. So I liked this book. Didn't love it. I wanted to love it a lot more. I've heard so many good things about it, and so I had quite high expectations, which is never a good thing. So some of these things might be maybe a slightly unpopular opinion. I don't want to be negative just for being negative, but there are some things that I didn't love about it. So just got to put that disclaimer out there, but I'll start with my pros. So I loved the setting. It's in like California, the Bay Area. I thought the setting was really well portrayed. I loved kind of the bookish themes. Like I said, they love to read as kids, and we're always talking about books and reading in their cozy closet. And so I enjoyed that a lot. I like the dual timelines. This was definitely a quick, easy, and addicting read. I probably would have read it in like 1 or 2 days if I had time. And there were some emotional moments. I didn't get as emotional as I thought I would, but there were some that hit me. Some depth throughout, but I will now go into my cons, and I'll start there. It didn't hit as emotionally as I hoped it would. I don't fully know why. We find out early on, pretty much at the beginning, that Macy's mom dies, and so she's dealing with the loss of her mom. There is some emotional depth there, just not as much as I like in a romance, like 7 Days in June or any Emily Henry or Abby Jimenez. Those are kind of the ones I've been loving lately, and this didn't quite feel on the level of that. And the main thing for me that was hard with this is that I didn't fully connect with Elliot and Macy in the past or the present. I did like the past, like kind of seeing them become friends as teenagers and bonding, but then there were some things that were weird to me. And then in the present, I just wasn't really feeling it. I felt like things moved really fast in the present, and I don't really want to give away because there's some things that happen in the plot that I feel like if I told you would be a spoiler. I just felt like things moved really quickly. I also kind of felt like they were a little obsessive and like codependent with each other. I don't know. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and I didn't feel super invested in them as people or the relationship, which is sad because it's kind of what you want when you're reading a romance. I also didn't feel like there was a whole lot going on in the book besides their romance. Like there were some little subplots, some other themes explored, but for the most part it was heavily romance, and I kind of like to have like something else going on in there. It just didn't really hit emotionally like I wanted it to, which makes me sad. Let me know if you read this book and if any of you feel the same, or if I just have no heart, because that's very possible. As far as quotes go, I found a couple that kind of show the codependency, in my opinion. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but here's a couple. Why can't everyone be like you? I can be enough of your world that it feels like everyone is. You're my best everything. Elliot was kind of my every friend. I don't know, just kind of weird. But overall, I did like the book. I would probably still recommend it. It just didn't impact me as much as I hoped it would. Okay, 2 more here. So we have Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler. This was a buddy read with Ellen from Ellen Made Book Club and Kat from Curious Cat. This is part 2 of the Earthseed duology. First book is Parable of the Sower, and this is like dystopian sci-fi. I can't tell you a ton about it, but this takes place 5 years after where the first book ended. And the main character, Lauren Olamina, she has basically created this new religion or cult, depending on how you look at it. It's called Earthseed. She's just trying to kind of get things moving. They're in this world of economic and social distress, climate change, not a great situation. And so they're trying to survive, but also kind of create a better world through this religion. Their hope is to one day go to the stars, space, and so that's kind of where the sci-fi element comes in. But pretty much at the beginning of this book, there is an ultra-conservative president who's elected. His slogan is "Make America Great Again." He is very oppressive to certain people. They're just trying to get around that and not be victims of that. Also, we have a perspective in here of Lauren's daughter named Asha, and she finds the journals of her mom. She is learning about her mom because she never knew her, and so you're kind of trying to figure out like what happened, why does she not know her mom, what all happened in her life. So I'll start with my pros. Just like the first book, this felt like an easy read in that it was quick and straightforward and engaging. Not easy as far as like subject matter, but quick and easy to get through, and definitely thought-provoking. It's made me think a lot, both of these books in this series. I really enjoyed getting Lauren's daughter Asha's perspective. It was intriguing to kind of see what happened in their lives. There was definitely more tension plot-wise here, for better or for worse, because there's a lot of bad things that happened, but definitely a lot more intrigue and tension that made me just really want to read. And for the most part, I think it was a satisfying ending. When we were talking about our thoughts with this buddy read, there were a lot of questions we had. There were some things that didn't 100% make sense and kind of made me conflicted on my thoughts on this book, but for the most part, I like where it went. I also just really enjoy her writing. Like I said, it's very straightforward, easy to understand. I like that it's in like journal format. These books definitely have made me think. So the cons here, this one was very heavy and depressing, even more so than the first book to me. And honestly, it affected me a lot negatively. I don't really get impacted by that as much. Like I can handle darker things, but this one just felt too close to home. There was a lot with like religion and politics that just felt too real. These fanatics that form as a result of this conservative president, they were just terrible and mistreating people, all in the name of Christianity. For me, that kind of breaks my heart. I personally am a Christian who wants to love people and not abuse people. Just the hypocrisy of someone doing terrible things in the name of religion, and obviously that's been done all throughout history, and I hate that. That just negatively impacted me, and it just felt too real with kind of some of the political things that have been going on in America for several years now. It was hard for me to read. Also, there were times where I wasn't as connected with the story or the characters as much as I was in the first book. Something just kind of felt like it was missing for me a little bit. I was conflicted on my rating when I first finished it, but I definitely liked it overall and would recommend this duology. I think I liked the first book better. I still like this one. It was just quite heavy and a lot for me at times. So here's a quote that kind of encapsulates the hypocrisy of these religious fanatics in the book. In almost the same breath, he spoke of both the generosity and the love we must show to one another, to all of our fellow Christian Americans, and the destruction we must visit upon traitors and sinners, those destroyers in our midst. Okay, one more book here. This was Serafina and the Black Cloak by Robert Beatty. This was also on my TBR. So this is middle grade mystery historical fantasy, and it centers around a girl named Serafina. She is 12 years old. This takes place at the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina, and she and her pa live in the basement of the Biltmore. No one knows they live there. She's pretty much hiding from everyone in the Biltmore. One day, these children start disappearing, and she discovers that there is a mysterious man running around who's wearing a black cloak, and he is the cause of these disappearances. She starts looking into it. At the same time, she's looking into her past because she doesn't know her mom, and then she makes a friend along the way, one of the prominent boys in the Biltmore, and they become friends and kind of investigate this mystery together. I like this one a lot. It was very good. I didn't really know what to expect, but I definitely liked it, and it's the first in a series, and I definitely want to keep reading the series. So my pros were great spooky gothic atmosphere. This feels like a really good fall read, and I loved the Biltmore setting. This was just a very quick, easy read, very fast-paced, a lot of action, just fun, easy, quick read, which I really enjoy, especially when I read a book that's over 1,000 pages. So that was a nice contrast. Really sweet, like good family themes, friendship, just acceptance, self-discovery, very much coming of age kind of story. I liked Serafina a lot as the main character. So the cons, I will say, Serafina was always throwing herself into dangerous situations and always getting out unscathed. Maybe that's just like a middle grade thing where the stakes are a little lower, but I found some things a little hard to believe at times. I lost my interest a little bit at certain points, like pretty simple plot. I feel like the story and the characters could have been developed a little better, but that might change as the series goes on. And again, I'm used to longer books that really develop a lot more. Overall, I really liked it. The atmosphere and the vibes were great, and the mystery was interesting. I thought it was quite fun and entertaining. And here's a quick quote. Never go into the deep parts of the forest, for there are many dangers there, both dark and bright, and they will ensnare your soul. So that is it, my 8 books that I read in August. And as always, let me know if you have read any of these, if you have similar or different opinions, and what some of your favorite books were, or least favorite books that you read in August. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!